you got money only, you can do politics. MCA is the one in power. If you want to die with no money, you go join DAP.
Welcome to the Are We OK podcast, the podcast that talks about public policies and politics in ways that are relevant to you. My name is Kian Ming, and with me,
I'm Peter, Mr. Money.
How's your Raya week been?
I enjoyed a very quiet KL for the week. We decided not to get out of here because for the first time ever, you can just travel anywhere without jam. So I enjoyed it.
I caught out on some sleep, caught out on some emails, and did some exercise. So it was a good 1 week.
Before we move on, I think we want to thank our sponsor for today, which is Zeus Coffee. Yeah, they've been our sponsor for quite some time working with us. And today, if you notice, my cup is a little bit taller than yours. You know what's the difference?
Mine is a hot CEO latte. So what is yours?
Mine is actually a cafe latte, but with soy milk.
Oh.
Yeah. So lately I have this fascination, which is instead of having dairy milk, I replace it with other kind of milk just to try what's the taste.
Soy milk, oat milk, that kind of thing.
Yeah, soy milk, oat milk. So far, I do find that my preference will be almond milk and soy milk. So thank you very much, Zeus, for sponsoring us in this episode.
I think, instead of starting in Malaysia, let's start with our friendly neighbours down south Singapore, when Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong announced that he was going to step down as Prime Minister on the 15th of May this year.
Mm-hmm.
And the current Deputy Prime Minister, Lawrence Wong, is going to replace him as the Prime Minister of Singapore. This was already something that people anticipated, but didn't really know when the exact date would be. So when you heard this announcement, what was your immediate reaction?
For me, it came as quite a surprise, although not surprise as in you didn't expect it, but a particular date, suddenly it just came. Like, hey, how come suddenly announced and so near? You get what I mean? It's like 1 month later, you're not talking about 6 months later, right? And finally, the first thing that came to my mind was like, wow, the Lee dynasty finally came to an official, not say end, but rather an official handover, right?
Official handover. I mean, there are still other people in the Lee family that may come back in active politics.
That's
and
right.
Aspire to be prime ministers.
Yeah.
But I think this is a good sign. I think for Singapore, whereby they show that they can have very peaceful and also ordered and systematic transition of prime ministership from one to another.
That's true. This has been something that has been talked for a while. And I think when we were saying that what came to the people's mind immediately, I immediately thought of one thing that you sent me right after that was apparently Toto for the number was sold out.
Yes. 1505. 1505.
First time I see Toto number being sold out, 1505. So that's really, really interesting. I think people also were like, wow, this is the day, man. Let's do something.
So let's go back to the date since you brought up the number 1505. Some people may think, why not pick a more auspicious date or a more maybe meaningful date? Mm-hmm. Because Lee Hsien Loong became Prime Minister on the 12th of August in 2004. So if let's say he were to have waited until 12th of August 2024, he would have been Prime Minister for 20 years and then stepped down then.
Yeah.
Right? And he could have waited until the National Day celebrations for Singapore, which is on the 9th of
at least celebrate your last National Day, right?
Yes, exactly. And then hand it over, So why, let's say from your standpoint, why do you think he didn't want to wait until that point in time?
My personal opinion was simply, well, perhaps it's about time because you kind of live with a clean slate because he has been talking about passing down the baton to Lawrence for quite some time. And right after that, subsequently last year, there were a lot of issues as well, like Iswaran La, all these kind of things all came out. And then there were a lot of cleansing as well. So I guess in a way, it's kind of like starting with a clean slate before anything else come in place.
Draw you maybe halfway behind the curtain, not fully behind the curtain. It is, I think, part and parcel of the thinking of Prime Minister Lee to want to give Lawrence the chance to make his speech and also debut as Prime Minister on their National Day.
Wow.
That's important because that's where you project your sort of new leadership.
That's pretty smart because I think during National Day itself, everyone's mood at that point as a citizen of the country, right? You are looking towards a nation as a united nation and let's grow together as a country.
But for Singapore, right, you have to ballot to get your tickets to attend the National Day celebrations, in terms of sitting at the stands. You even have to ballot to attend the rehearsals for National Day.
Oh wow, serious? Like F1 like that?
Like that, yeah, correct. So it's a big deal
Like go
for
watch
Singapore.
concert,
Yeah, exactly.
Need to ballot. Here is like.
Well, we have a more laissez-faire
better not go
kind
lah.
of. I mean, if you want to go early, you can go, but to see the tanks go up and some parades and stuff like that, especially in Putrajaya. I attended before once as a deputy minister. That was quite interesting, experience. But for Singapore, it's totally different. And also, again, many Malaysians don't know this. Yes, there will be a speech that will be made by the Prime Minister on National Day itself, the celebration. But there's also, one would say, an even more important speech that is made usually 2 weeks later, called the National Day Rally. And this speech is made in an enclosed setting, indoor setting, whereas the National Day parade and all that is NDP is held outdoors. And this is where the Prime Minister will make a speech that touches on important policy issues. So last year it was an important issue whereby the Prime Minister Lee announced different kinds of new HDB developments. This is one of the reasons why PM Lee wanted to step down before August to give Lawrence the chance to also make his National Day rally speech. Right. So again, pulling you behind half behind the curtain lah. Right. So this is part and parcel of the kind of calculation that somebody like PM Lee and also the PAP has to make lah. Going back to the person like when you see Lawrence Wong, what are some of your initial impressions of him?
He's quite interesting. I noticed that he has some similarity with our current PM, where he was a minister of finance during the Asian financial crisis. On top of that, he also held quite many ministerial posts before, I noticed, in different area of ministries.
Yeah, so he became a MP in 2011 and held different Minister of State, that is the equivalent of Deputy Minister, and then later on Minister position. Rose up through the ranks. Now, he's currently holding the portfolio of Minister of Finance. But and of course, some people know him as the Prime Minister who likes to play, Prime Minister to be that likes to play the guitar. His guitar playing is actually quite good, He jammed a bit with Zafrul when he visited Zafrul here. And maybe some people may not know, especially coming from Malaysia, his education background is also quite interesting because he's not from one of those traditionally seen as top secondary schools.
Ivy League, right? Yeah.
Ivy League for Singapore.
For Singapore, not the top.
So not like Raffles, ACS, Hwa Chong, He went to a neighborhood school called Tanjung Katong Tech, TECH, from quite sort of like a humble, a working class kind of background. And then later he went to VJC, did his A-levels, and he went to Wisconsin Madison for his undergraduate degree in the US. Good school, good state school. He's got good pedigree, but not from such a traditional background, from a Singapore perspective.
Right. So here's where the question is, right? Because Singapore is known to be a place where there's a lot of mold, right? There's a lot of system and structure and things tend to be fitted into a particular mold, right? Yeah, and suddenly you have a Prime Minister was didn't come from those pedigree Ivy League, I think, right? And it's just like another guy. And why they pick such a person?
We like to think of Singapore as a place that's very systematic, well-planned. Even from a political transition standpoint, we expect these things also to be well-planned. But I'm not sure whether you remember, Lawrence Wong wasn't the first prime ministerial candidate to replace Lee Hsien Loong. It was somebody by the name of Heng Swee Keat, who was given that role, a couple of years back. And then when he had to be put in the front line to respond to this kind of pressure, the public perception was that he may not have been up to the task, right? So because of that, there was an adjustment. Very rare for Singapore, very rare for PAP, whereby they had to pivot from Heng Swee Keat to finding another new candidate. And one of their senior ministers, gentleman by the name of Khaw Boon Hwa, who former Malaysian, was given the task of asking the different MPs, especially those who were ministers and ministers of state, they are sort of like doing a straw poll. Who do they prefer, among the cohort, among the 4G generation, to see who they would prefer to be the next prime minister. And Lawrence was the consensus candidate. I know some people in the Singapore cabinet, and among the people who are running for this, in the running, so to speak, you don't really go out to campaign for it, but you circulate in the same arena, so you know who are the ones who are in play lah. So there were 3 of them, I think, that were in the sort of like a consideration. It was Lawrence, it was the current Minister of Health, Ong Ye Kung, and the current Minister of Education, Chan Chun Sing. So out of these 3, I know Chun Sing a little bit because he was the Minister of Trade and Industry when I was Deputy Minister. And in fact, we share a little bit in common. He was my senior in RI. I didn't know him then. And then he was in Cambridge, right? I went to Cambridge for my master's. And he was seen as somebody that was more favoured, very, from a strong military background, very, more traditional RI,
Fits
Cambridge.
the mold.
Yes, and then Ye Kung is a very talented politician. If you go and see his Instagram posts and all that, it's very funny one.
I think he's a good influencer lah.
Yes. His latest one was with using Taylor Swift as a parody and all that kind of stuff, right? And he's also, maybe a not so similar background from the rest, in the sense that he was seen as somebody that was more from a Chinese educated standpoint. Right. So, in the end, Lawrence was the consensus candidate because he was seen as not particularly or over ambitious, didn't really lobby for that job, and I think that was that was how he was the most popular lah, among all these candidates.
Singapore seems to be very systematic when it comes to the transition of power and succession planning. The last time Malaysia had a very obvious succession planning led to the person going into jail, right?
Yes,
for a very long time, and in the end he came back and be a prime minister. Ever since that time, I've never seen a clear succession planning. It is always kind of like, about time this fella is gonna leave already, then straight away this fella is gonna be a PM, and then within months the fella will be a PM. But in Singapore, it is very well planned. It seems like they groom you into it, and even within a company that small like mine, right? The idea of succession planning is extremely, extremely important. And you don't expect someone to wake up tomorrow to be the CEO of a company.
You have to be trained and go through the process, right? And all that. Yeah.
But it seems like Malaysia has never really had that in place.
So I think,
why is it so?
I think if, let's say, you look at Dr. Mahathir's time, first time as Prime Minister, he was there for over 20 years, right? So, succession planning never came across his mind. And then when he finally said he was going to resign, and Pak La stepped up to the plate, what we saw, and again there was a trend that was repeated, when Najib became Prime Minister as well, is that after a certain period of time, Dr. Mahathir will start attacking his successor.
Yes.
Right? Whether it's Pak La, later on Najib, and I don't think you would see that in Singapore lah. Definitely when you step down as Prime Minister, you would support whoever is the Prime Minister. If you have any disagreements, you don't highlight it publicly.
That's right.
Right. So that kind of system. In fact, that kind of system is in place in most other countries, most other democracies lah. Right. So that's one thing to note. Dr. Mahathir's I would say negative influence in that kind of succession planning. The other thing is, even you mentioned the person who went to jail when the first succession plan didn't work. Remember, there was a second take on that under Pakatan Harapan, right? When Dr. Mahathir was supposed to hand over the reins of power to Anwar, right, during PH 1.0.
Yeah, it
right?
seems like handing over is a problem.
Yes, correct. And even now, when people ask, okay, so what's going to happen after Anwar? Right, the default answer is that we want Anwar to have a second term in power. Right?
Yeah.
And if you think about it, right, we have this discussion in the US. Oh, you got two, relatively old people in Biden and Trump who are contesting. They are 80 plus. And if you look at Hsien Loong, he's 72. Anwar is 76. Right, so if let's say we go another 4 years, Anwar will be almost 80, and you want him to get a second term, right? So that is also, I think, part and parcel of the succession planning. I think, given the fact that nobody else has stepped up to the plate, I think Anwar is probably the best choice that PH has. But I think, from a succession planning standpoint, it will be interesting to see, okay, in PKR, who are the people that can step up to the plate? Is it Rafizi? Is it Nurul? Is it Amiruddin, who's the MB of Selangor? Is it somebody like Nick Nazmi? So these kinds of questions, I think people are starting to ask. And I would also say, people are also thinking about who else can be PM from other parties, right? For example, I think the Fadila Yusof, the Deputy Prime Minister from GPS in Sarawak, I think he's shown himself to be quite a competent minister. Now he's leading the charge on renewable energy. And then, even on the opposition side, this Menteri Besar of Terengganu, Dr. Sam, he's being positioned by PAS as a possible prime minister candidate that is more acceptable to different communities in Malaysia, right? So it's interesting to see these kinds of happenings or positionings.
Yeah. So could you draw me back to the curtain a little bit at this moment, right? Is the idea that generally when we look at Singapore, they do understand, or any corporate per se, right? They will know that people don't wake up to be a leader. So therefore, maybe during my final term that I'm serving, you will already see someone who's in a significant leadership position who we can kind of see shadowing this person, right? And you kind of know that this is eventually going to be groomed to the next leader, or at least 2%, right? Something like that. But this doesn't seem to happen in Malaysian politics.
Because I think people who are in power tend to want to hold on to that power. And even if, let's say, they are in a position where they feel secure, they may not think that others are as competent as they are, right? So this is the sort of like perennial struggle with people who are in power. That's why having term limits is a good thing. And that's why in the former manifesto, after 2018, in the 2018 general election, PH put in the manifesto 2-term limit for the Prime Minister. So that, even when you're going into your end of first term, going into your second term, you're thinking already, who's going to succeed me?
Right.
So I think having those kind of term limits, are something that's good.
Right. So we should say that by Anwar's second term or PM second term, if it happens, right, we should be seeing some sort of a shadow.
If it happens even at the start of the second term,
right?
You should see already.
Start of second term, we should start seeing that, right?
Yes.
Now, allow me to be naughty a little bit, since you are still a party man from DAP.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. We also see the same pattern happening in Penang to a certain extent.
Yes.
Yeah.
We have term limits there.
When Chow became the new CM, also there's a rift between the old and the new, right?
Yes,
so
yes.
it seems like it's a Malaysia tradition. And this time round, since you are the party man, is there anything that you can share with us?
So I think it's quite well known in Penang that there is some tension between the former Chief Minister Lim Guan Eng and also Chow Kon Yeow, the current Chief Minister. A lot of things happening, under the radar, and then some things also expressed in Facebook and leaked videos and things like that. So. I think it's not an ideal situation because now Chow is in his second term. He has to step down. Right. So ideally, there should be the same kind of succession planning that we've been talking about. But it's not clear.
Yeah.
Because, people speculate here and there, and some of the candidates who are in the running, they also don't want to emerge too quickly because they fear that, they'll be seen as taking sides one way or the other, and then they suddenly may lose the opportunity, to take over because you anger one faction versus the other, right? So, that's something that not just DAP but Gerakan faced as well. When there was talk that Kosukun last time needed to step down or was going to step down, different people fighting, and then we are not clear. That time they were not clear in terms of who was going to succeed Sukun, and then at the end of the day. 2008 came, and then DAP and PH took over power in Penang. So it is something that I think should be of concern. I'm not saying that DAP would lose in the next state election, but PH may be in trouble, as a whole. So it's something that definitely the DAP leadership is aware of. Trying their best to find a way to manage it. And right. I think the people in Penang, they are seeing this in action much more clearly than the both of us.
Right.
Yeah.
And in terms of, I think it'll be quite exciting to see what's ahead since Chow is in his second term right now. Do you think history will repeat itself, or what are the odds of it?
I think it will happen. The state elections will probably happen together with the general elections in Penang. It would be in the context of a lot of a larger, political uncertainties that have to do with not just Penang, but also the entire country, who's going to perhaps be able to win a majority and form the next government, right? So watch that space. We'll see what happens in Singapore under the new Prime Minister Lawrence Wong, and then we also will see what will continue to happen in Malaysia from a succession perspective. Be right back. Welcome back, guys. So we talked about the Singapore transition in terms of PMship just now. Now I want to shift the focus to more domestic stuff, which is Anthony Loke's recent interview in Kelas Kejap, where he spoke about a lot of things. I think he did very well in terms of explaining his own position and his the pathway for DAP moving forward. Many supporters of PH or DAP may not necessarily, agree with his answers, but I think he defended his position well. But
really? Don't agree? I thought it was a fantastic interview.
Okay, so this way again, I try to draw behind the curtain, from the perspective of supporters as well as for Anthony, by looking at one particular issue. He said, and I quote he said something in response to what Kyrie asked him, right, about whether he considered when he was in student politics and when he was in university, whether he considered joining the BN or not, right? And then he said, tidak, saya rasa faktornya ialah MCA. Saya bukan tak suka BN, saya tak suka MCA. Right? And that got a lot of attention, So when you sort of first heard or read about that piece of news, what was your reaction?
I think that is quite understandable, because he pointed out one thing very accurately. During that time, the Persepsi was Parti Tauke. And yes, many of us during the time, especially as a someone who's not very politically literate at the point, you always have this idea that you got money only you can do politics. So, and MCA is the one in power, and you go into MCA, why? Because you get money.
You get money, and then also you use that money to gain more influence.
That's right. And rich people take care of rich people. Anything else, not important. So that was a general idea. And especially when I went to the university during that time, you can also see the same play going around, because we had those mahasiswa
those student
representatives.
organizations.
And I did not know that it is really politically affiliated. During the time. Until I went into uni, then they started telling me that, actually it's really politically affiliated.
This Chinese organization or MCA fellas.
They will really go in there and scout for the next talent to join their parties. And so they always have this saying among local uni students that if you want to join politics, you join MCA, because that's the one with the money. And you go in that time, you make sure you got some money as well. But if you want to die with no money, you go join DAP. That's what they always say.
So a lot of people criticize Anthony to say, how come he said tak suka MC, and then he said bukan tak suka BN, right? So people said, actually, the reality is when DAP was campaigning, when we were campaigning, when we were in the opposition, we whack UMNO as much as we whack MCA, right? So that I think was something that didn't make people happy, especially the PH supporters lah. But again, I draw you behind the curtain, and this is something that I haven't discussed publicly in great detail before. But after I left the Boston Consulting Group, I had an interest in politics, especially on the policy side. And I joined a think tank that was affiliated to MCA. It's called the Institute of Strategic Analysis and Policy Research. It's a think tank. And my idea was to want to get to know the political ecosystem and contribute through the policy route. Right. And what I learned was when I joined this think tank, even though we were in Wisma MCA, somehow, of course, my boss at the time didn't really want to get too close to the politicians. But in the opportunity, when I had the opportunity to engage with some of these MCA politicians, right, my general sentiment was that none of them were interested in policies, right? They were more interested, like what Anthony said, Parti Tauke, to try to increase their own influence and also their own sort of assets, if you will, right? So I think from that standpoint, right, and especially coming from a Chinese person, your options are not to join UMNO. You can't join UMNO, right? Your options are to either join, MCA, maybe Gerakan if you're in Penang, or you join the opposition if you are interested in politics. So I really respect Anthony for making the decision to, join DAP relatively early on. He was 18 years old when he joined the DAP, and also taking the step to work at HQ. where he really learned a lot about what party politics is like, lah. Right? But for me, I took a different route. I not only joined a think tank that was related to MCA, but I was poached by a friend who was running a think tank in Gerakan at the time. It's called the Socio-Economic Development and Research Institute, or SEDA. And again, I wanted to go in there to take a look at whether or not people were interested in policies. I think Gerakan slightly better. You have people, within that ecosystem that, coming from the Lim Chong Yu kind of tradition, and Tokin Woon in Penang, that were more policy oriented. Sukun, he has a PhD in education, former academic, so they have a bit more policy brains. But I think at the end of the day, politics was what dominated these parties, right? And I'm not necessarily saying that DAP is not like that or not 100% like that. I would say at this point in time, DAP is less like that. Not saying that DAP won't become like that, but less like that at this moment in time. But after being in power for a while, who knows, things may change. So for me, I never really wanted to join MCA or Gerakan because I saw that the fit was not quite there. When I came back from the US after my PhD, I saw that there was an opportunity to really go in to work together with people like Tony Phua, Hannah Yeoh, Tioni Ching, Liu Chin Tong, and then later on Yeo Bi Yin and others as well. And then you feel much more of a team lah. You go in to really struggle and sort of like fight against the BN, and also try to bring a new politics in terms of introducing more policy discussion in politics lah. So
right.
I think that is probably a different kind of viewpoint of why I joined DAP, and why Anthony chose that kind of particular route to not join MCA.
Right. So actually, having said that, right, both of you come from a slightly different background in terms of you came from a think tank side, which is 100% policy oriented, right, and he went into work in the politics side, right. Now, I personally have some friends who actually work for think tank as well, and I'm always very curious. Because when I speak to them, right, there's a particular friend of mine who actually works for UMNO think tank, and I always ask him, you do all this research, shouldn't you already know that like certain things are quite bad, right? Then wouldn't you suggest? So then he say, yeah, we got suggestion, but it's like that lah.
Yeah, they don't.
So then it comes to my mind, right? Then why on earth you have a think tank for? That's number one, right? Number two is that if you're going to spend this money to do all this policy research and you're not going to do anything about it, why want to spend on it? Number two is that if you are working in a think tank for such an organization and you're going to do so much, but yet whatever you do is actually not going to be listened to, why still want to be there?
Yeah. So I'll get more into the weeds of UMNO when we talk about Tengku Zafrul later, but just to answer that particular question, what you need to know is the incentive structure in that kind of organization, that kind of political organization, I'm talking about UMNO here, and maybe to a lesser extent MCA when they were in power, is that the policy part, right, in terms of delivering the kind of positive outputs for the country, for the state, for your constituency, becomes secondary. The primary goal is, if let's say there is a particular policy decision that needs to be made, who is going to benefit and how can I benefit from it? That's the difference. Because when the amount of money at stake is so high, so much, your think tank staff actually just this is okay lah, nice to have, academic, I just put it in the shelf. At the end of the day, I execute that contract, I execute that policy, I'm going to be able to benefit from it financially. Right? So I give you an example lah. This may be not something that we have forgotten by now, but at one point in time, there were like 4 water companies in Selangor. Do you remember?
Yes.
Right now, Shabas, Abbas, all these kind of different companies, and it's basically entities that were created during BN's time in power in Selangor, and it was like for lack of a better word, you distribute the goodies, so to speak, so that this particular guy who's connected to UMNO can have a piece of that action in terms of infrastructure projects and that kind of stuff, and then another guy who's working for another person within that organization can have another slice of that cake. So it doesn't make sense for you to have 4 water provision sort of like entities, but that was what happened. people didn't really pay attention to it in terms of the details because the opposition was weak at that time. So that's why policy-wise it doesn't make sense. But from a perspective of distributing goodies, being able to enrich yourself that those were the things that were more better incentivized
Right.
So if you're a guy with half a brain, you go in there and then you see policy stuff ignored, this kind of other stuff, you can get benefit from it. Which one would you choose?
So it's so in a way it is still useful, but not for policy's sake, but rather to find out information of how it works so
that you can help yourself to the goodies
Instead of surveying and find out how to make use of this, I know exactly who it benefits the most so that I can work out something
Yes, exactly. So going back to the DAP, since this topic is about the DAP, mostly about the DAP, I think now that DAP is in power for the second time, MCA is very weak now. The question that Anthony or the issue that Anthony brought up MCA being a party of Taukes or MCA being a party that's close to the Taukes, close to the bosses, actually is a question that DAP has to answer.
That's right. So, which I think is a fantastic part in KS there, where they straight away pointed out, aren't you becoming more and more like MCA, or at least in the danger to become like MCA? Now, I personally, there's two layers to this question that I want to ask. You have been there when it was an opposition and to the day of coming into power, and until today you are still involved, although quite minimally, I would say, right? Or passively, not minimally, right? Passively, right? But
not in the front line.
Not in the front line, right? Now, the thing is that you have seen how the whole party evolved, and the other day listening to the podcast itself, firstly, how do you feel as a party member? Second, staying in power, being in power, there are, to a certain extent, let's face the reality, there are more people to please. And like he say, there are certain efforts to not rock the boat. It's not like, it's a bit complicated. It's a bit grey. It's becoming more and more grey.
I, like you, I think we agree that Anthony did a good job in terms of explaining himself and also the party's position. But there are always some gaps and I'll discuss some gaps with you. So what the party needs to manage is when you're in positions of power, let's say at the state level in Penang and Selangor for such a long time, since 2008, this 16 years already. And now you're in power at the federal level for the second time. You'll have a runway of another 4 years and you'll still be the strongest party representing the non-Malays. How then do you ensure that the kind of corporate interests, the kind of corporate kind of corruption that may come along the way and influence you, maybe not Anthony, but other members further down the line, right? People who want to lobby for certain, access, certain contracts, certain positions, they will start and then they'll come This is the beast attracted to the honey right? So there will be different corporate people who want to get to know the ministers, blah blah blah, that kind of stuff, deputy ministers, other MPs. How do you want to make sure that the integrity of the party is still kept And I think this is where again pointing back to Singapore, you have a strong anti-corruption commission. You have certain very strong norms within the party. In this case, it's PAP that's quite well respected. So we don't really see that kind of ecosystem or that kind of strong message being sent. And I'll give you a very specific example. The only cabinet minister who was replaced in the December reshuffle was from the DAP. That's the human resource minister, Siva Kumar. But a lot of people forget that within a month of him taking office as human resource minister, 2 or 3 of his special officers were hauled up by MCA and put in the lockup for and accused of corruption.
That's right.
Right. So that wasn't really played up in the press, but it's something that I think should have been a serious thing for the party and of course one can say, oh, Anthony replaced him later on, maybe because of performance, maybe because of these allegations of corruption, but was there any public statement made?
No.
Yeah. Was there any sort of saying that no, this is something that's unacceptable? We want to make sure that these kinds of things don't happen in the party? Don't have, right?
Yeah, actually, if you put it like that, Because he's so forgettable to me, right? Because he didn't do much. To some extent, yeah.
No. You are normal because most people would have forgotten. But you see, for me as a party member, as somebody who was who joined the party because you wanted to uphold certain practices in terms of integrity and whatnot, and also my influence in Singapore. When I see something like that, it sits very uncomfortably.
It's supposed to be and in a way, actually, it was a message sent out to people and say, don't think that we are empowered and you are incorruptible, right? We're still going to do something, right? And if you look at the Singapore version, when this kind of thing happened, the party leader will always come up and make a statement and say, look, we'll never tolerate this kind of behavior. And so when they did it in DAP, I think when this happened, it was a message sent out very clearly that you still need to perform despite the fact that you're in power, and we will not tolerate corruption. But it wasn't announced it wasn't sent out a clear message to the public. It's only, if you know, you know.
So let me give you a sort of like counterfactual. What happens if that particular HR minister actually was a good performer, but his staff continued to have these practices that are less than transparent? Would he have stayed on? Right? We don't know.
Right. No, however, nonetheless, even in the KS podcast, he also never bring this up to talk about.
Right. He wasn't asked. I mean, if Anthony Loke were to be sitting here, which I don't think he will, these are some of the questions that I would ask him, because I know about the party issues much more than outsiders, you see.
Now this also lead me to realize one thing as well, right? Which again, due to the nature of my career as a media person and a communication person, I think Singapore ministers has a very good communication strategy.
I think most of our ministers, our meaning the DAP ministers, I think they do a good job in terms of their social media campaign and social media management. But I think, if let's say you are going into the policy issues, these will be internal party policies, that are put in place so that you can discourage and send a strong signal that corruption is not tolerated.
That's right.
And I think this is probably one of the gaps that I think wasn't really touched on in great detail in that Keluar Sekejap interview. Another challenge that I think the party has is when you talk about the relationship with the bosses, with the Taukes and all that, right? Actually, there are different levels, You have those right at the top, the big businessmen, people who are in the listed companies, the corporate titans and whatnot. And most of them have easy access to different ministers, deputies and whatnot, including from my party, and I know some of them as well. I interacted with some of them when I was deputy minister as well. But then what about the other levels? Let's say the SME level, the different kinds of business associations. I think this group is a little bit neglected because most of them don't have that kind of corporate access. They are not, your top companies, the listed ones, but they actually need more help in some ways. They actually need help in terms of alignment of government policies, applying for different grants and loans and stuff like that. And I think this is one area where DAP probably can do more of in ways that MCA couldn't. Because last time MCA, basically what they did was they had all their supporters in different business associations. They would only game in town. When you needed help from the government, these guys, the associations, who can see them. But if let's say there's no benefit to these MCA leaders, then the associations will be left to their own devices.
True.
Right? So now, now that DAP is in power, I think there are a lot of ways in which, these associations can be assisted and helped along the way so that they can upgrade themselves, they can upgrade their members to look forward to the future. So one example would be, I'm an advisor to a association called the Federation of Automotive Workshop Operators Association of Malaysia.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, there's such a association. Okay.
This is an association of basically your car repair shops.
Oh, wow.
So they actually have an association. They have chapters in each state, and as you can imagine, their level of policy understanding and advocacy is not that high. Right, compared to, let's say, insurance companies in the auto sector, right? So they need a lot of help in terms of being able to communicate their aspirations to the government, whether it's Bank Negara, Ministry of Transport, and stuff like that. So I've helped them a little bit here and there, even things like, for example, if let's say you're going to have more EV cars coming into the system, how then do these workshops change their way of doing business. Because when you talk about EVs, right, there are very little spare parts already. There's much less things to repair. A lot of things are actually more electronic rather than those kinds of physical spare parts, right? So, these are the kind of industries that we need to, see how we can help to align with other players in the larger ecosystem. And I think this is something that, DAP's leadership also needs to look at.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of, once you're involved in all this, there's a lot more practical effort that can be made in terms of upskilling and reskilling, right? Like you're talking about like workshops, right? I think, when EV comes in, they are going to face a problem, right? Because how am I going to handle it? Am I equipped with the right skill? Yes. And even if I want to get equipped with the right skill, who do I go to ask for help, right?
And you may need to spend some money in terms of capex to change the machinery in your car workshop.
Then what grants do I apply for? Because like me being an SME ourselves, we also always ask this kind of question. I mean, I'm fortunate enough that
you know more people.
I know more people, and the nature of it being a media company, so people know us, so we do get that access a little bit here and there. But if I'm not, I don't think I'll get any access.
Correct.
And even my other media friends who are not so involved in this space, they also get less access. They're less known about what's actually happening, what are the grants and help available. And this leads me to the next thing, right? Which as we discussed a little bit earlier, was the idea that currently, what do you think is the strategy that is actually DAP employing? Because is there actually a coordinated strategy to actually roll out all this?
The answer is no.
Yeah,
it's not well coordinated, but I think it's based on existing norms, existing kind of relationships that different leaders have. So I'll give you a very specific example. Sabah is trying to attract more industry because their manufacturing base is actually quite low. So the Exco in charge of investments in Sabah is a person from DAP, the Adun for Luyang, Ginger Pun. And he works quite closely with Liu Chintong, who is the MITI Deputy Minister, right? Because MITI is in charge of FDI, manufacturing, that kind of stuff. So they work quite closely together to try to align objectives at the state and federal level, right? But and of course, I think when I was Deputy Minister, I made sure that I spent a lot of time looking at the E&E sector in Penang, right? Because it's an important industry for MITI. And it's also an important industry for Penang, which is DAP. DAP's chief minister, is in Penang. So that kind of alignment is more in terms of the people who have that kind of interest and that kind of vision. But I don't really think that it's coordinated, in a very systematic fashion across all ministries, across all of the leaders at the state and also federal level for the DAP.
So shouldn't it be like, what would your recommendation be? Because drawing from my own experience in running a company, I think there should be departments. Like, for example, if today I'm running a party, maybe I'll say, this particular kind of things, you are the spokesperson. This one is this, you are the spokesperson. Now, this is important as an organization simply because you know who to go to when there's certain issue arise, or even as a general member, if I feel like I can contribute towards, say, the EV effort, right? I know who do I approach.
Yeah.
I know when I voice up, they also know who to recruit. And if I want to do things for, like, for example, the associations, business association, when I speak up about it, I know who do I bring my thing to, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
So there is a natural division of these kinds of responsibilities in the party depending on your portfolio, transport, housing, human resource and whatnot. So those things are quite natural. There's an organic process because you are the minister. You have to take these issues on board by yourself. But what I think can be done better, and this is what Lim Guan Eng did quite a lot of when he was finance minister as well as Secretary General of DAP. He organized informal lunches, gatherings and meetings between the DAP ministers and deputy ministers on a regular basis. Every 2 months we'll go MOF, eat some nasi kandar kind of food and all that, which was pretty good. And then we'll discuss policy issues. This one, what can we do, to enhance this particular policy? What can we do to manage some of the politics in this particular ministry? And I think that kind of process not only builds camaraderie, but also increases the communication channels between the people, between the leaders who are in power, the deputy ministers and ministers. As far as I know, I don't really think Anthony does this on a regular basis. Right? So maybe you have some CEC meetings, maybe you have some large meetings involving DAP, MPs and ADUNs and maybe people at the state leadership level. But those kind of things are quite, it's more general. It's not so strategic. It's not so detailed. It's not so sort of like a tactics, So, that probably needs to be done more of. But yeah, I don't want to say any more after people say that, hey, you are no longer a leader, why you can say so much? Yeah, but it's okay, it's okay. I think the people in the party who knows me knows that I'm coming from a place where I want the party to be able to serve the community, to serve Malaysia more effectively.
Right.
Yeah.
I think, forgive me for holding another just last question here, right? Last question, huh? Yeah. YB Anthony Loke was being questioned about this thing. DAP, while he says that it's a multiracial party, but ultimately the diversity is lacking, right? And you yourself, being someone who listened through the whole podcast, after all they said and everything what is your feedback towards it? And is there any recommendation or something like that, especially in this area of making DAP more
inclusive?
More inclusive, yeah?
Yeah. So I think maybe just to wrap up this session on this note, I would say that Anthony has the right aspirations. He does want to make DAP more inclusive. Of course, he being in the party for a long time since he was 18, he also needs to know how to balance between the more traditional members and also leaders in the DAP that wants DAP to stay within its comfort zone of primarily advocating for issues that are of concern to the non-Malay communities, versus wanting to be more inclusive. And I think it will be a slow process of adjustment. Anthony understands these kinds of issues very well. And he's, as far as I understand, given a mandate to the DAPC or the youth chief in DAP, Kelvin Yee, to try to recruit more young potential candidates into the party of all races, right? And I think if let's say that process can be done in a coordinated and a smooth way, DAP should have a lot more younger candidates, female, male, as well as from different racial groups, Malay, Chinese, Indian, Sabah, Sarawakian, to at least put on the table to present in the next general election. Because frankly speaking, and I think Anthony and other leaders in DAP will also recognize this, in the 2022 general election, there were not many new and exciting candidates from the DAP. Yep. So maybe just stop at that. I hope I didn't piss off too many DAP leaders, and then we'll be right back.
Welcome back to the third section of today's podcast. And this one, we're going to talk about your good friend, Tengku Zafrul, right? Yeah. And
well, you know him as well,
Yeah, I know him as well, yeah. But this time round, it's really interesting because recently he just resigned as the treasurer of UMNO Selangor, right? And accompanied with it was his Facebook post on 6th of April itself, which that is where it's really interesting. So I'm just going to read it out a little bit, some of the important points that I see there. And I would like you to take us behind the curtain and help us to understand what is actually really happening, right? Yeah. So he started with this sentence, apa hala tuju UMNO Selangor, right? Semasa Majlis Iftar Ramadan and all those kind of things, yeah. He said that I tekan the keperluan untuk kembalikan kegemilangan UMNO di Selangor. And he says that in PRU 2022, the result was very bad. Satu kerusi pun tak renang, and stuff like that. Then later, he said, sekarang dah 8 bulan lepas PRN, masih tak ada apa-apa. Postmortem mendalam, tak ada. Strategi baru untuk tawan hati rakyat, tak ada. Yeah. So he went on kind of like a rant, and he said that ultimately, since I don't think I can contribute anymore in this UMNO Selangor realm, might as well I just commit myself to the central planning side, right? He listed down here also 4 areas of his strategy of what he thinks can mengembalikan kegemilangan UMNO Selangor, which number 1 is laksanakan kajian sikap ikhlas melambangkan denyut nadi keseluruhan rakyat negeri Selangor. Well, for me, it's a sentence that I don't quite understand what on earth does that mean.
Basically says you need to understand what are the aspirations of the voters in Selangor.
Alright, I see. It's a survey and something like that. Okay. Number 2, memodernkan operasi organisasi. So it's talking about efficiency and using data and all. Here's where I think it sounds very corporate to me, and it's a good thing. Yeah, it's a good thing, right? I can relate lah what you say. Ketiga, mencari pelapis dengan hati yang terbuka, and kerana akhirnya organisasi UMNO Selangor dihakimi rakyat and pemimpin. And keempat, rangka kerjasama win-win dengan rakan-rakan kita di negeri Selangor. And kelima, paling penting, menterapkan budaya politik baru kepada budaya intelektual, fokus kepada solusi dan dasar, which is something we always talk about. Buang cah kenting. Kerana if we tidak ubah budaya, tak kira lah tebal mana pelan visi kita, akhirnya kita kekal tanpa kuasa. And in the end, he ended with reiterating his commitment to UMNO bahagian Kota Raja and UMNO Selangor. With that, he resigned, right? The interesting part here is this. First, Tengku Zafrul is always known as a character who's very well-mannered, very careful with what he says. I mean, being a CEO before, he has to be very careful with what he says. And he knows exactly what to say and when. And most of the time, you will rarely hear him say such things because it's not politically correct. And this time round, it is a sharp, direct, boom! So, yeah. This is truly one of the most exciting ones. So for yourself who knows him, I'm not sure if you had a conversation with him right after that. But what are your thoughts about this? What's your first reaction when you see all these things?
Yeah, so for the record, I didn't speak to or WhatsApp or message Tengku Zafrul on this particular issue. I just said, I was a bit disappointed that he seemed to have given up on Selangor. But I'm glad that he clarified with the subsequent posting on the 6th of April, because he stepped down as UMNO Treasurer Selangor on the 1st of April, right? So some of the things have already been said in the Keluar Sekejap podcast, whereby Khairi and Sharil did also say that at the same time as him, sounding out these kinds of concerns about the direction of the leadership in UMNO Selangor, he also showed his picture together with Zahid Hamidi, going to meet the president and sharing a meal with the president, to show that he's still a team player, right? So I think that is his way of balancing out, he has a shocking statement, but at the same time he also makes sure he has the ear of the party leader in terms of the president. I would say that in some ways this is consistent with Zafrul's character. We did talk about how he's careful, and I think even for Khairi and Sharil, they also mentioned that. But given the fact that he is still of that kind of corporate and CEO background, he also wants to see KPIs, right? He also wants to see results. If let's say you're in a situation where you're given this particular responsibility, and then you don't see any instruction, you don't see any direction coming from the leaders within UMNO Selangor, right? Then after a while you get frustrated as well. So why do I want to hold on to that position when I can't do anything with it, right? So I think that is his way of sounding the warning signals, and in fact it is actually a warning also to the president of UMNO to say that, look, you appointed this guy as the head of UMNO Selangor, this guy called Megat, who contested in Gombak and lost both the parliament as well as the state elections. And if let's say you were to ask people, even people who are, relatively, politically aware, if you were to ask them, who is the head of UMNO in Selangor? Actually, nobody would know. if who is the head of the, penerangan in Selangor? Nobody would know. This is I think a reflection of the kind of weak leadership that we see UMNO exhibiting in Selangor, and probably one of the reasons why Zafrul is frustrated.
Yeah, because if the UMNO Selangor team fails, he's part of the leadership team, right? And it's going to reflect badly on him together because he's part of the team. Yes. So now I was wondering when he chose to speak up, and this time around, not in a very quiet manner, but rather just go direct and point out all the things. Wouldn't he step on quite a lot of tails?
But I think he feels that it is a risk worth taking because the situation in UMNO Selangor is actually quite dire lah. And you know,
Why do you say so?
one of the reasons is actually probably the most important reason is Selangor is the most sophisticated and affluent state in Malaysia. People's thinking here is different one from, let's say, other states that may not be so developed. The level of political sophistication and awareness is also much higher. So at this point in time where, you know, the kind of information sharing and also the awareness is much higher, right? You have the people's aspirations here. And then you have the UMNO leadership's capabilities that are here. The gap is huge, right? So, you know, it's not going to be easy to close this gap. And if, let's say, you know, somebody like Zafrul doesn't feel that he is supported, that he is able to work with the leaders to close this gap, why spend so much energy in it, right? And, you know, when he made those criticisms, one of the people that came to the defense of the UMNO Selangor chief was the Ketua Bahagian of Bangi, this Datuk Zaidi, whom I've seen and interacted with before. You know, all I will say about him is that he is the traditional old school kind of warlord kind of UMNO character.
Right.
You know, not much social media following, don't really have much things to say about different policies. In the context of Bangi, definitely somebody that has lost a lot of his appeal. He wouldn't be able to contest that at the state level and even hope to win, you know, 20 or 30% of the vote. You know, so you know, that is the kind of leadership that's emblematic of the general decline of UMNO in a state like Selangor. And I think to make matters worse, right, it's not just, I think, Zafrul's resignation that is a negative signal to UMNO Selangor, but it's also the fact that UMNO decided to do a few things in Selangor. One is they decided not to take up the 75 posts of Ketua Kampung in UMNO that were given or put on their table by the Selangor government, by the Selangor Unity government. Right? And they decided to give these positions back and say we are going to get even more positions from the federal government through the Ministry of Rural Development that Zahid Hamidi heads. Right? So they are going to get, I think, 300 over this equivalent of Ketua Kampungs, but at the federal level for them to distribute among their own members. So the you know, you look surprised, but the outcome will be something like this lah. Firstly, you do not show a commitment in terms of working together with PH in Selangor, right? Which is one of the points that Zafrul made in terms of mengukuhkan lagi hubungan di antara kawan-kawan di Selangor. That's one. Second thing is, yeah, you have more people to appoint, but if let's say you're appointing the same old fellas as Ketua Kampungs, people who may not be able to reach out to the local population, especially the younger voters and whatnot, you are, you know, empowering the existing warlords. So what's going to change? Nothing. Right? And you know, the kind of challenges that UMNO would face in a place like Selangor will grow and grow. And it will be, you know, increasingly difficult for UMNO Selangor without people like, you know, Zafrul, without people like Khairi and Sharil to be able to lead the charge in Selangor, to be able to win back the Malay vote, and especially to win the younger vote. Right? So if I were to ask you, who is the UMNO Selangor chief? I don't think you would know also.
No idea, man.
Right? You only know the UMNO chief at the national level because he's been making a lot of noise on the Allah issue, right? Right. So you know, this is part and parcel of, I think, a very serious challenge to UMNO Selangor, and I think it will also be a challenge to PH, because if let's say this is the direction that UMNO is going in Selangor, meaning not wanting to really work together with PH, maybe that will also translate into the attitude that UMNO would take in other states as well. Right? So I think this is something that you know, we need to monitor closely, and I think this also ties in quite well with a paper that I released recently. It's a study of the voting patterns in 47 DAP state seats that 47 state seats that DAP contested in the 2023 state elections, whereby I showed DAP did gain from working with UMNO, they, depending on the state, anywhere between 2 to about 6 or 7% in terms of growth in the number of in the percentage of votes. But at the same time, I also found that 4 out of 5 previous voters that previously supported BN, who were Malay voters, shifted their vote to perikatan nasional in the state elections. Right, so you really can see the kind of tide shifting already.
Yeah.
Right, and I think this is something that people, the people who pay attention to these kinds of figures and numbers would realize. But I think the warlords in UMNO, they either don't realize it or they are willfully ignorant because they are there at this point in time because of their closeness to the president, because of their control of the local branches. But in terms of their larger effectiveness, is actually very little. Yeah, so it was quite interesting. After my study was released, got a bit of press coverage. This was in early April. There was a response or a comment by a friend of mine by the name of Dato Dr. Marzuki Muhammad. Again, a name that most people would not know, but those who follow politics would know. He was the former principal private secretary to Tan Sri Muhyiddin when Muhyiddin was the education minister, and then later on home minister, and then when he became the prime minister. So very, I would say, right-hand man of Tan Sri Muhyiddin. He's got a PhD in political science from ANU in Canberra. A very good scholar. He's now associate professor at IIU, the International Islamic University. So his response to my study was to say that actually UMNO is on the back foot now, because for UMNO to win seats in the next general election, it will have to depend on a lot more non-Malay support coming from the DAP. And its own Malay support base will continue to be eroded. Right? So this is something that he can see, and others in the political system, those in Bersatu and also in PAS can see. And then at the same time, he is also being a bit naughty by throwing out this fact, right? By throwing out this comment that says that UMNO is going to be more dependent on DAP. It also makes UMNO look weaker. It also makes UMNO to be seen as not being able to stand up to DAP, so to speak. Of course, Dr. Marzuki is smart and sophisticated enough not to make this point too obvious in the way that some of the rebel rousers would do. But that point is made nonetheless. And I think this will be a continued struggle for UMNO. And it's something that I think can threaten the viability of UMNO working together with PH in the lead up to the next general election.
Yeah. I'm starting to think that whoever who kind of walk off or give up a little bit of hope on UMNO, right? If they were to come together and form their own party, right, they are going to be much more significant. That includes the gang from Kolos Kejap and whoever.
Sure, yeah. It's quite difficult to form a party and to have your grassroots and whatnot. But I think these days it's easier, partly because of social media. And then also I think people are looking for alternatives.
Yeah, they are.
Right? They are trying to look for a centrist Malay party, to give them a voice, give them hope, not just in places like the Klang Valley or Selangor, but if let's say that kind of party with good leadership can show itself,
that's right,
to be effective, even places like Kelantan,
that could be one.
Yeah, because Kelantan, frankly, I can tell you a lot of the outstation voters who go back to support PAS, right, they are the people who would not want to live in Kelantan.
That's right. Yeah, actually, here's where I do notice one thing when I read part of your report as well. I didn't read the report, but I read the article that got covered, right? What I noticed is this, that the truth is, even in Selangor, it's getting more and more polarized. Yeah, what happened is that people are starting to get more stronghold of certain votes, but there is a huge swing vote in the middle now. And this huge swing vote at this very juncture is swinging towards the PN side.
Yes.
And I would almost dare to say that it's not actually swinging at Bersatu, it's swinging at PAS. And I'm actually seeing it even among intellectual Malay communities and people that I speak to here. One of the main reasons that they start to form this idea is that since no one can be trusted, might as well trust religion to a certain extent. Right? But when you speak to them truthfully as well, you know that they are also not entirely swinging towards that side.
They are not.
Yeah.
They know the weaknesses of PAS.
Yes.
But between UMNO and PAS at this point, at this juncture, I think when push comes to shove, a lot of the Malays would probably prefer to vote for PAS, and Bersatu is a beneficiary of that
That's
kind of sentiment.
And we can see actually PAS is actually trying to put up a much more moderate stance
In
to
Selangor,
actually gain
in some ways,
certain support. Right?
If you look at the way they are positioning themselves for the by-election in Kuala Kubu Baru, which we will talk about in a separate podcast, they're being very careful in terms of how they position themselves. With like what we talked about, presenting Dr. Sam as a potential PAS Prime Minister candidate.
The recent stock incident
Yes.
also.
So their challenge would be to get more professionals, to get more people who can articulate, views on policies which are more moderate, more centrist, but yet at the same time consistent with Islamic teachings. The people like Dr. Zuhul and others who left PAS to be in Amanah, probably some of the younger people who sees PAS as a future in terms of their own political aspirations, they may be able to get more influence in there. And I think this is a big warning sign to UMNO, and also in some sense a warning sign to PH as well, because we talk about Dr. Akmal just now, and I want to sort of like bring this point up especially in terms of swings that you talk about. The people who would like the rhetoric of Dr. Akmal, right? They are the ones mostly, I think, would be the ones that if push comes to shove, they would be the people supporting PN. They are the hardcore sort of like PN supporters type, who don't like any party to vote DAP, that kind, so on and so forth. So he is trying to appeal to that crowd that won't vote for UMNO or PH, right? And then by doing that, he may alienate some of the people in the middle ground. Some Malays, maybe they support him on the KK Mat issue, but suddenly he go and start talking about even the shoes, even the prayer mats that they are selling at Aeon. That becomes a political or religious issue. He's politicized it. I would say he's gone over right? So that may not appeal to the middle ground, and more importantly also, it gives ammunition to PN to say that you say don't you ask your backbenchers not to fall into the trap of playing up 3R issues that PN is playing up. But PN is not playing up this particular 3R issue. Is your own unity government component party,
That's right.
in the form of UMNO through the youth leader, but your the UMNO president hasn't said anything to try to tone him down. More importantly, the Prime Minister doesn't seem to have taken a leadership position in terms of toning down the discussion on this particular issue. The person who has taken more of a lead on this is actually the Agong.
Yeah.
Right? So
Yes.
when people look at this and they say, hey, something is not quite right here, and it may affect, let's say, the turnout among the non-Malays in KKB, and even may give some of the non-Malay voters an incentive to cast a protest vote against PH, right? So it'll be an interesting by-election to watch. But in the larger context of what we're talking about here, definitely the kind of appeals, to the extreme and also to the middle is something that we need to continue to focus on.
Yeah.
So we right back after this, talk about something lighter. We're going to talk about Ubi Kayu and dietary requirements in Malaysia. Be right back. Hey guys, last topic for the day is about Ubi Kayu, and specifically a proposal that was made by the Speaker of the Dewan Rakyat, Dato' Johari, who was the former MP for Sungai Petani. He was criticised quite a bit when he suggested that because of the shortage of rice, certain variants of rice, we should consider switching from rice to Ubi Kayu because they are all carbohydrates, right? So when you read this news, what do you think about this policy suggestion?
Initially, when I read it at the time, I wanted to laugh. Yeah. But when I go and watch his clips talking about it, it wasn't the usual people making dumb statement kind of thing. He's being logical.
Yes.
He is being logical, and I realized that although I wanted to laugh at first, but there is a certain sense, and this reminds me of the whole potato story as well, how potato became a staple food as well. But yeah, I'm starting to wonder, like, so how does this affect in terms of, like, is it even legit? Is it even something that affects policy to a certain extent? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so from a policy perspective, it is a legitimate, I think, suggestion. Because in the larger scheme of, let's say, agricultural products, right, it would be good sometimes for us to think about diversifying. Right, so there have been suggestions made that, instead of focusing on trying to achieve 100% self-sufficiency level for rice, for domestic production, we should look for other grains that maybe doesn't use up so much water because of climate change and whatnot. And The Economist actually came out with an article to say that rice consumes too much water. There's actually better crops that gives you equal calorific value, and also carbohydrate. Things like millets, for example, that grow that can grow with much less water and are quite resistant as well. And Ubi Kayu may be a possibility, in terms of putting that on the table. But there are some sort of like challenges from policy as well as optics perspective, lah. So optics perspective, I think you can see, lah. Ubi Kayu.
I'm also. I think like the initial reaction was an optics reaction, yes. And I think in the past there's so many of a joker kind of statement that it made it even worse. But if I were to really think seriously in the policy perspective, yeah, I think there is some validity to it.
Okay, so yes, acknowledge that there are optics issues, and also the fact that sometimes people associate Ubi Kayu with you eat it because you're poor, that kind of thing, not so high status kind of food lah. Although it's quite delicious to me lah. But from a policy perspective, right? Who do you think should have recommended this policy?
I would think the Food Security
Ministry, right? Ministry for Agriculture and Food Security, right? And the fact that Dato' Johari felt he had to come up with something like this, doesn't it reflect a little bit on the Ministry of Agriculture and Food Security? And also, I'm not sure whether you remember this or not, but the head of NACOL, who's the Bukit Gantang MP from Bersatu, now he's supporting the unity government. He came up with a suggestion or even maybe a policy proposal in his head to say that, we're going to start selling this Madani rice.
Yes.
Madani rice, and some of it is going to be imported, mixed with some local rice and whatnot, right? And he said the selling price was this amount. And it created a lot of uncertainty in the market because that price was higher than what was available in the market at that point in time, right? So, to me, it shows the lack of policy coordination, especially for such an important ministry, the Ministry of Agriculture, where you have different people making their own suggestions and proposals, and then the Minister of Agriculture doesn't seem to be, quite there taking the leadership or wanting to make sure that his voice is the one that's being heard, because this is stuff that's under his portfolio, right? I'm talking about Sabu lah, right? So I think, the reason why I wanted to bring up this issue was to show that there are these kinds of policy gaps in the government, and if they continue not to be addressed, there will be, whenever there are gaps, whenever there's vacuum, there will be other people that will insert themselves into that picture.
Right.
So, this problem, I think, will continue to persist.
Right. So I was thinking to myself, could it be that Johari was at the point, Tan Sri Johari was at the point, just making a statement as making a statement, less of trying to influence anything?
Possible, but if let's say I was the Minister of Agriculture, I would use that opportunity to come out to say, hey, Tan Sri, that may be a good suggestion, but let's look at some of the underlying issues. Do we have enough production for Ubi Kayu, land space and that kind of stuff? And then the other thing is price, because I did some checking. 1 kg of Ubi Kayu is
more expensive.
Yes, correct. It's about 5 ringgit, for Ubi Kayu versus 2 ringgit for rice. That's the domestic rice lah. So all these things, of course, as speaker, you don't really have to think about the price of rice and Ubi Kayu. But as a Minister of Agriculture, these are the things that you need to think of, and you need to, get ahead of the game in terms of the larger narrative lah.
Yeah. Right? So here's where there's a question also, is that does YB Mat Sabu has the relevant skill set to do this? Because it's quite a scientific portfolio lah, let's be honest.
Scientific policy, it's not so simple.
It's not a simple kind of thing lah. It requires a certain specific set of knowledge in order to do it, and policy making structure kind of thing. So does he have a strong team? Those are part and parcel of the questions. I know people who have worked there before. Like I was talking, having a coffee with someone who used to have experience there, right? But my question here is this, right? That I thought was pretty good that Tan Sri Johari suggested was the idea that there's a lot of empty land space, a lot of wasted land space, which last time in one of the budget, I can't recall, it's 2023 or 2024, they did talk about utilizing this wasted land space for underutilized land space for agriculture, whether is it for prisoners to do something. And I was thinking about it. Actually, what the strongest benefit of tapioca, aside from the fact that whether is it expensive in the market or not, it's actually very easy to plant.
Yeah, correct.
Because
very easy to grow.
My dad used to plant Ubi Kayu. And what he did was just throw the Ubi Kayu there, and then for the next 6 months or 8 months, I was sick of Ubi Kayu because he liked it. He just you don't need to do anything, and then it just keep growing, right? And he said one thing, that why not you allow people to utilize the underutilized space to do some plantation? And I thought to myself, right, actually, that itself is a wonderful policy because you are talking about an easy to plant crop. Is it going to be a staple? Forget about it. But there is a demand for Ubi Kayu. There are plenty of people who are already utilizing this underutilized land to do illegal plantation anyway. Might as well you make it legal, make it proper, and giving incentive. So any Tom, Dick and Harry who doesn't have a job, who wants to venture own business, better than planting cendawan, which is more
harder to manage.
And tapioca is just I throw there. And then after I can go and sell in Pasar Tani.
So this is not a new suggestion. It has been tried out under previous governments and even in the current government. I'm not sure whether you would remember this. Rafizi had a policy under his IPS scheme to allow exactly that, underutilized land, especially federal land, to plant things like chilies and all that. Right, so it's something that's ongoing. He got some funding from the Ministry of Economy to fund those projects, and maybe got some success stories here and there, but the scalability and the coordination part are some of the challenges, because when it comes to land matters, right, land is actually a state matter, right? So you need to talk to the state governments in order to try to utilize this land, and even where it is federal land, you need to coordinate with the relevant federal agencies. Or the relevant federal entities that own or have access to these kinds of land. So for example, actually there are many universities in the rural or the semi-rural areas that are UITMs that actually have access to large parcels of land that is not being utilized. If let's say you want to take it into the next step, right, don't even talk about Ubi Kayu lah. Talk about higher value added crops where you can work together with the universities, maybe the UITM, maybe UPM, to start to do smart agriculture, right? Because you have that university ecosystem, you have access to that land, and if let's say you're a federal government that can have the ability to not just bring in the technology but bring in partners, bring in people from the corporate sector, bring in researchers. And then you can deploy them to use this land. Even bring in, capital and people from Singapore, because Singapore is also trying to expand its agriculture footprint in terms of food security.
I think they'll be more than happy to invest in Malaysia agriculture, man.
Bringing people from Korea and other parts of other developed countries that want to have these kinds of JV. You can plant higher value added crops. You can do different kinds of research and experimentation. You can even do some of this in places like Johor. Make it as part and parcel of the special economic zone. You have an agriculture or smart agriculture angle that ties in with food security, which I'm sure the Singaporeans would be interested to explore and invest in.
Yeah.
Right. So so from Ubi Kayu, actually you can go into a much more sophisticated policy discussion. But sadly, I think the environment here in Malaysia is that you focus on these kind of cheap thrills and cheap wins. You don't really focus on the larger policy issues. And right now, of course, the blame I think goes to the opposition quite a bit, because they can get cheap political thrill out of these issues lah. But at the same time, I also have to acknowledge, when we were in opposition, we also make use of some of these things, stupid things that or even some things that may make sense, when we think more deeply, but on a superficial basis, we criticize a lot of these kinds of things that, the BN MPs and leaders used to say.
Right.
Even like Ahmad Maslan, people remember him as, the guy who used to cook nasi goreng during the COVID period, But he had some other, I think, interesting suggestions from his different portfolios that he held. I think what we should do in this podcast and also other places is to encourage people to think more deeply about these issues and just not look at it at a surface level, but think of the different policy implications.
Yeah. I thought that's something that it's really worth thinking about, especially when it comes to food security, which is really, really a very big issue. Yeah, and so when it comes to that part of it, I think for those of you who are thinking, I just want to bring in this story of potato, right?
Okay.
Yeah, for those of you who do not know, actually, potato, especially in France, was seen as a poor man's food. And for a very, very long time, they actually resisted it, right? And what happened was that they did some tricks around it by coming up with some, not say a coordinated marketing campaign, but they kind of got some people to kind of endorse it. And then eventually they sell the idea that it's not a poor man's food. And it became a staple. And it solved a lot of problems because during the time, wheat was supposed to be the number one, it's kind of like our rice, right? Yeah, but
carbohydrate source.
Because of wars, thieving and stuff like that, what they realized that potato was much more easier to grow, and because you grow underground, so even when there's issues happening around, people don't go and steal a potato because they don't know where to dig. So it really solved a lot of practical problem, and ultimately just by changing the perception of it, it really help to enhance the food security per se. And maybe, just maybe, when for all of us here who are watching this,
Ubi Kayu may be a replacement in some ways.
Ubi Kayu could really be a replacement in some way, or whatever other crops are. So I guess next time, the part of the story here is that when we hear such a funny statement or whatnot, maybe it's time to look beyond optics and ask ourselves this question, whether certain jokes are really a joke, or is it a viable method to solve certain problem, or can be developed into a more bigger policy.
Yeah, and this is where I think good ministers with good policy understanding should step in to advocate for more mature and also high level discussions.
That's right. Yeah, and for me, from a private sector, for all of you all there, if you're running a business, maybe if you really think there is a viable solution, I think if you suggest to certain ministers or certain people in power, it would carry even more weight. Right?
I would say don't suggest. You just look for land, you do it first, and after that you show.
That's a good idea,
that would be a better way.
Because after that, then people can see, right? Then
you wait for
no more
ministers
joke
and all
already.
that. Then
there's no more joke already. Because
exactly.
when you're really doing it, I think to a certain extent, for nation building, business owners out there, you are very much involved in ground level kind of thing. Right? Yeah. And
these kind of operational issues become important. So thanks. It's been a long 4 topics. Thanks for your patience. And also, joking aside, thanks for your continued support. And please click like and subscribe. We're almost 1,000 subscribers. We hope to be able to reach 20,000 by the end of May, perhaps. So keep on supporting the Are We OK podcast with myself and also with Peter.
Thank you very much. We'll see you next week.